With just a single prompt, students can generate paragraphs that paraphrase, cite, and even critique academic texts. In response, we need a radical reimagining of how we assess students. This requires a radical reimagining of how we see students. We should see students as editors. Editing is an apt metaphor to describe the creative and technical process of synthesizing, manipulating, interpreting, and extracting information to produce a cohesive narrative. In cinema, the editor is not overly involved in production. He or she does not need to be an expert in cinematography, sound engineering, or lighting. Their crucial role comes towards the end of production. Their role is to bring cohesion and clarity to the vast amount of film footage gathered by the film crew. Likewise, students do not need to overly involve themselves in the technicalities of academic writing. Instead, their focus is to bring accuracy, cohesion, and clarity and uniqueness to the information generated by large language models. Assessment rubrics need to turn their focus from production towards editing. In the face of growing AI capabilities, we need the development of editing literacies to be the central focus of assessment. This notion of editing literacies is derived from the academic literacies field. I prefer the term editing literacies rather than editing skills, because using the term skills insinuates that they are fixed, tangible, and you can take them off the shelf and transfer them to other contexts, whereas literacies imply that they are developmental, malleable, relational. They are in essence languages that differ from context to context. The editing literacies that a math student develops are not the same as the law student. Also, there is a growing acceptance within the academic literacies field to see text as just one of many mediums available to students. Editing literacies can incorporate video, sound, VR, meta, and so on. Why is the conception of student as editor important? It gives us a direction of travel. It helps us cut through the noise, which in turn impacts how we construct assessments. The power of conception to shape one's actions is reflected in his fictional dialogue between the first president of McDonald's Corporation and his business advisor. The business advisor explains to the president that he should not limit himself to thinking about McDonald's as just a fast food business. In fact, he should see McDonald's as a real estate business. Focusing solely on the food aspect of the business will restrain his activities. Instead, he should focus on the land where he sells that food. It is clear from McDonald's massive expansion that the concept of a real estate business played a pivotal role. Likewise, as we start to recognize that our students are no longer in the production business, but in the editing business, we are likely to see a massive expansion of many possibilities. But the first step is to name it. We must be intentional. We must name it in order to provide a solid foundation for this field to develop. Additionally, it's not easy for many of our colleagues to embrace AI technologies without the help of such a conception. In 2024, we still have colleagues who are trying to fight against the tide, but the war has been won. As Leon Furs points out, AI detection in education is a dead end for several reasons. First, large language models continue to develop at a rapid pace. They have attracted considerable funding. AI detectors cannot compete with the vast resources of Microsoft, Google, OpenAI. Second, students can use prompting tactics that are designed to circumvent detection tools. Third, false positives are risks most departments are not willing to take. Unknown to some, litigation is commonplace in most universities. Fourth, the additional workload that AI detection tools demand is beyond what most departments can bear. Unlike plagiarism tools, using large language models does not give a clear-cut result. Staff will need to spend much more time investigating and administering the extra paperwork from appeals. It may be possible to overcome one of these hurdles, but not all four. We do not want to end up on the wrong side of history. Case in point. Another argument against AI is to demand a return of the in-person closed book invigilated handwritten exam. In response to this demand, there is a reason why most disciplines have moved away from such exams. It is due to the focus on recall and memorization at the expense of higher order critical thinking. Moreover, exams put unnatural pressure on students that affects performance. If we are truly in the business of preparing students for the workplace, shouldn't we aim for the most authentic assessment? Most students will enter workplaces where AI tools are commonplace, or at the very least, they will have access to vast databases at their fingertips. Nonetheless, I don't believe these counter-arguments will persuade our colleagues to embrace AI, because there is something more than just the apprehension towards new technology. I believe there's an ideological connection to the status quo. Many would see that the current academic conventions that we have, such as academic writing or the way we conduct research, are natural, uncoerced, value-free, and normal. So any reimagining or any technology that tries to change the status quo is seen as unnatural, coerced, value-laden, and abnormal. This is not so. Academic practices are a direct result of human subjective decisions that reflect what a particular group values. What they did not value, they did not accommodate. More specifically, they believe that the ability to express ourselves academically is a sign of intelligence. This is not always the case. It is often a sign of culture. Academic practices come out of a particular middle-class, neurotypical culture, and the further one is away from the culture, the harder it is to adopt these cultural norms. For many students, these norms have long been a barrier to academic success. So reimagining the student as an editor can be a way to level the playing field. If students have trouble adapting to middle-class cultural norms, a simple prompt can generate text that ticks all of the right cultural boxes. The fact that all it takes is a simple prompt to mimic current academic conventions indicates that they are predictable, repetitive, uncritical, and monotonous norms. It is not a creative process. Before we discuss the examples of editing literacies, it is important to point out that the concept of student as editor is not entirely new. There have been similar concepts that were disseminated with the growth of internet technologies. For example, Siemens' idea of connectivism, which was purported to be a learning theory for the digital age. This sought to rebut the idea that learning should be an activity that only takes place in our heads. Siemens argued that learning today is too complex to be processed in this way, and that we need to rely on technological assistance to store, access, and retrieve knowledge. However, such theories were developed several years before the refinement of large language models, and also, they contain many moving parts that dilute the central focus of the concept and are not particularly relevant in our current time period. It is also worth pointing out that the student's ability to edit has long been acknowledged by assessment rubrics, but they tend to have a very narrow focus on acknowledging editing as merely proofreading. Or if they have a more expanded definition of editing, it is often overshadowed by the assessor's focus on the conventions and technicalities of academic writing. This section will outline some possible approaches. Editing through correction. The student is tasked with ensuring that the information they generate is accurate. There are two aspects to this type of editing. The first one is straightforward. Students make sure that the information that they generate is factually correct. The correct dates, the correct actors, the correct places. The second aspect is more convoluted. That is checking for bias. Unfortunately, large language models reflect the bias that already exists in society. They have been found to contain racial bias, gender bias, geographic bias, and language bias. Thus, students can be assessed on how they identify and address bias. This type of editing empowers students by giving them the responsibility to ascertain the veracity of the information. Since large language models are being increasingly used in educational and professional settings, it is vital to inculcate this type of editorial diligence in our students. This is truly assessment for learning. Often, the type of critical analysis we require from students is largely performative and difficult to transfer to professional contexts. Editing through commentary. Editors need to be able to articulate and justify their editing choices. Likewise, Students can be tasked to provide a reflective running commentary alongside the work they generate from AI tools. This commentary will describe and justify their choices. They may explain why they decided to include certain information in their assignment, or why they decided to omit certain information from their assignment, or how they recognized the bias in the information, or what steps were taken to address the bias, or what was the process of refining their prompts to get a desired answer. This approach promotes meta-learning so that students can develop techniques and awareness of their own learning process and become self-directed, adaptable learners. Editing through simplification. It is often the job of the editor to bring clarity to a project. They are the unsung heroes of why audience gravitate to a particular film. As the saying goes, films are made in the cutting room. In this light, this approach seeks to assess students' ability to simplify the content generated by large language models. Since large language models are trained on vast amounts of text data, they often reproduce the same convoluted, overly complex and strange language as their source materials. If we are training our students to be experts, wouldn't it be prudent to train our students to convey expert knowledge to non-experts? Also, it would be beneficial for students who already self-translate every time they pick up an academic text or write an assignment. Their self-translation is a literacy that often goes unacknowledged. There are, of course, obvious ways for students to simplify text by avoiding jargon and using smaller and more common words. But there are two more imaginative avenues to simplify text, the first of which is storytelling. All academic writing can benefit from being construed in terms of story. Thinking of academic writing as narrative can simplify much of the content generated by large language models. Students are assessed on their ability to weave various elements together into a coherent, interesting, and easily understandable narrative. For example, students can frame their research as an epic or a journey of discovery, or frame their theoretical inquiry as a mystery. The second aspect is to simplify text by humanization, or as Pollock and Bono stated, by giving text a human face. All too often, academic writers remove the human elements from their storytelling in an effort to sound scholarly. Unfortunately, this is replicated by large language models. Thus, students can edit these texts by inserting their humanity into these texts. This could be something as simple as writing in first person. After all, it is they who generated the work and conducted the experiments. Or students can reveal their journey of self-discovery. Much of academic writing is airbrushed, sanitized, cleaned up. Rarely do we see the struggles, the bumps in the road, the U-turns, the back and forth, the regrets. As Baseman stated, what never reaches the public record is the tinkering with equations on the back of a cocktail napkin. Or as Collins stated, those tinkerings, the stories, the thinking, the uncertainties are dustbinned. They are considered inappropriate to academic writing. It will be beneficial for our students to help them realize that they are humans first, before they are anything else.